On the 14th of November, 1965, at 10:48 Indochina time, Captain Bruce Crandall banks his UH-1D into landing zone X-ray, Ia Drang Valley, Pleiku Province, and rotor wash slaps his visor as tracer fire climbs from the tree line. The starboard door gunner leans into the M60D and fires 200 rounds in 22 seconds, tracers stitching the wood line at 10 feet above ground level. The Huey takes multiple hits, but none pierce the cockpit. The gunner is hit in the shoulder but keeps firing. 30 years later, historians credit armor plating and evasive maneuvers for Huey's survivability. They miss the simplest truth. The gunner's body and his visible tracers drew fire away from the pilots, the fuel cells, and the hydraulics. The public narrative says titanium armor, 120-knot dash speed, and pilot skill kept the Huey alive in Vietnam. Bell Helicopter's 1967 brochure advertises boron carbide seats and armored fuel cells. MACV, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, adds belly plates and cockpit shields in 1966. The Army Aviation Digest publishes evasive maneuver drills in October 1968. Crews train on nap-of-the-earth flight and spiral descents, but door gunners fly with open hatches, no body armor below the chest, and their legs dangling over rice paddies at 15 feet. They sit in the most exposed position on the aircraft, and they survive or don't, based on a tactic the manuals never formalize. The UH-1D Huey carries a crew of 4, 2 pilots, a crew chief, and a door gunner. Each door mounts an M60D machine gun on a bungee cord, firing 7.62 by 51 mm NATO rounds at approximately 550 rounds per minute. Standard ammunition belts mix 1 tracer round for every 4 or 5 ball rounds, red phosphorus visible to 800 meters in daylight, farther at dusk. When the Huey flares to land, it slows from 90 knots to 0 in 20 to 60 seconds, hovering at 10 to 30 feet above ground level. The aircraft becomes a stationary target. Pilots focus on collective, cyclic, and pedal inputs. They cannot return fire. The crew chief signals touchdown and watches the rear arc. The door gunner faces outboard, scanning the tree line for muzzle flashes, dust kicks, or movement. When contact begins, the gunner does not take cover. He leans out, feet on the skid or deck, and fires in controlled bursts, 10 to 15 rounds every 3 seconds. Tracers arc into the wood line, bracketing suspected positions. The visible stream accomplishes 3 things simultaneously. First, it suppresses enemy riflemen, Viet Cong and People's Army of Vietnam gunners duck or shift position when tracers crack past their heads. Second, it fixes the enemy's attention. A human eye tracks the bright tracer line back to its source, the gunner's position in the open door. Third, it creates a point of aim, AK-47's RPD light. Machine guns and 12.7mm DSHK heavy machine guns pivot toward the most visible threat. The gunner becomes the lightning rod. Enemy rounds that would otherwise hit the cockpit, the turbine, or the fuel cells instead converge on the doorway. The tactic works because the gunner's silhouette and his tracers are more compelling targets than the Huey's armored nose. But the cost is absolute. The M60D has no shield. The gunner wears a flak vest that stops shrapnel but not rifle rounds. His legs, arms, and head remain exposed. A single AK round at 715 meters per second will shatter bone. A 12.7mm round will sever limbs. The gunner trades his body for the aircraft's survival. Not passive defense, but active sacrifice. On the 14th of November 1965, the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, inserts the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment into landing zone X-ray, Ia Drang Valley, Pleiku Province, at 10:17 Indochina time. 16 UH-1D helicopters from Company A, 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion, carry 80 soldiers in the first lift. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Moore's battalion faces 3 regiments of the People's Army of Vietnam, approximately 2,000 soldiers entrenched in the Chu Pong Massif. Captain Bruce Crandall commands the lead flight. His chalk lands at 10:48. Door gunners open fire before the skids touch dirt. The starboard gunner on Crandall's aircraft fires steadily into the tree line 50 meters west, tracers marking the suspected PAVN positions. PAVN riflemen return fire. 7.62 by 39mm rounds punch through the thin aluminum skin. The Huey absorbs multiple hits, concentrated in the aft cabin and cargo bay, not the cockpit. The gunner takes a round through the shoulder but continues firing until the last rifleman clears the door. Crandall lifts at 10:52, climbs to 1,500 feet, and returns to play me for the next load. The pattern repeats across the formation. Door gunners lean into their M60Ds during the final approach, firing controlled bursts as the helicopters decelerate from 90 knots to hover. The tracers Brilliant red streaks in the midday haze draw immediate response from PAVN positions. Muzzle flashes appear along the tree line, green tracer rounds arc back toward the helicopters. But the incoming fire converges on the door gunners, not the pilots. The aluminum fuselage around the cargo doors absorbs the majority of hits. Over the next 3 days, Company A flies 22 sorties into X-ray. Most aircraft return with battle damage. Door gunners account for the majority of crew casualties. Pilots suffer far fewer wounds. Not one pilot is killed by ground fire at X-ray during the insertion phase. After-action reports from the 1st Cavalry note that door gunner suppression allowed the vast majority of insertions to proceed without aborting. The 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion records significantly higher casualty rates among door gunners than pilots across over 1,000 combat sorties in November 1965. Bell helicopter engineers examine the damaged Hueys at Play Me in late November. They find bullet holes clustered around the cargo doors, not the nose or the tail boom. Maintenance logs confirm the pattern. The majority of battle damage occurs within 1 meter of the door gun mounts. The PAVN targeted the visible threat. One North Vietnamese after-action report, captured in December 1965, instructs riflemen to prioritize the machine gunner. Without him, the document notes, the aircraft cannot fight effectively. The 1st Cavalry does not change its tactics. Gunners continue to fire from open doors, and they continue to draw fire. Ia Drang validates a brutal arithmetic. The gunner's exposure buys seconds, and seconds buy survival for the crew. Rotor wash on the visor, tracers in the air, and the enemy aims at the light, not armor, but attention. At 3 in the morning Indochina time on the 31st of January 1968, Viet Cong sappers breached the U.S. Embassy compound in Saigon during the Tet Offensive. By dawn, the 1st Aviation Brigade launches emergency resupply and medevac missions across the 3rd Corps Tactical Zone. UH-1H helicopters from the 120th Assault Helicopter Company fly into the city at rooftop level, 20 to 40 feet above Le Loi Boulevard. Door gunners fire at VC positions in second-story windows and alleyways. Warrant Officer Robert Mason pilots Chalk 4 in a flight over District 1 at 7:30. His starboard gunner leans out and fires sustained bursts into a building at 80 Pasteur Street. Tracers mark his position. VC riflemen in 3 adjacent buildings return fire. Mason's Huey takes multiple hits in rapid succession, all in the aft cabin and tail boom, none in the cockpit. The gunner is hit twice in the left leg, but keeps the M60D running until Mason clears the rooftops and banks east toward Tan Son Nut. The urban terrain amplifies the pattern established at Ia Drang. Helicopters maneuver between buildings at speeds too slow for evasive action. Door gunners fire continuously, their tracers bracketing windows and balconies. VC shooters, armed with AK-47s, RPDs, and occasional RPG-2 launchers, track the tracer streams and aim at their source. Pilots report seeing incoming fire shift mid-burst, following the gunner's tracers rather than targeting the cockpit or engine cowling. In Huey, 200 kilometers north, the 1st Cavalry inserts Marines and PAVN, Army of the Republic of Vietnam, troops into the citadel on the 31st of January. UH-1E helicopters from Marine Medium Helicopter Squadron 364 hover at 15 feet in the Imperial Palace courtyard. North Vietnamese Army troops fire from the ramparts with AK-47s and RPD light machine guns. The crew chief on YL-23 mans the port M60D, firing several hundred rounds over 2 minutes while traversing the stone walls. He takes a round through the jaw, but continues firing until the last Marine exits the cabin. His tracers keep PAVN heads down long enough for the aircraft to lift at 9:47. YL-23 lands at Phu Bai with over 24 bullet holes, the overwhelming majority in the cargo bay. The pilots are uninjured. MACV command history for 1968 records disproportionately high door gunner casualties across all helicopter companies during February and March compared to pilot casualties. The disparity is not random. Maintenance reports from the 1st Aviation Brigade show that the majority of battle damage on UH-1s during Tet clusters within 2 meters of the door gun positions. A February 1968 intelligence summary from 3rd Marine Amphibious Force notes that captured VC documents instruct shooters to prioritize the visible machine gun. He represents the immediate threat. The same summary recommends no tactical changes. Gunners fly the same missions in the same posture for the next 7 years. Tet demonstrates that enemy doctrine explicitly prioritizes door gunners, and American commanders accept the trade. Not ignorance, but calculation. On the 11th of May, 1969, the 101st Airborne Division launches Operation Apache Snow to clear the A Sao Valley, Tua Tien Province. The objective is Hill 937, later known as Hamburger Hill. UH-1H helicopters from the 158th Aviation Battalion insert the 3rd Battalion, 187th Infantry Regiment at landing zone Granite, 1.2 kilometers east of the hill, at 8 in the morning Indochina time. The landing zone is a 1-hectare clearing surrounded by triple canopy jungle. PAVN forces from the 29th Regiment occupy fortified bunkers on the ridgeline. Door gunners on the first lift fire into the jungle before troops dismount. The crew chief on Chalk 2 mans the port M60D, firing into the canopy at 12 feet above ground level. Tracers cut through the foliage in bright streaks. PAVN gunners return fire with 12.7mm DSHK heavy machine guns positioned 200 meters upslope. The DSHK fires 12.7 by 108mm rounds at 600 rounds per minute, each round capable of penetrating 20 millimeters of steel at 500 meters. The Huey has no armor thick enough to stop a 12.7mm round. The first DSHK burst hits the tail boom, the second burst hits the cargo bay. The gunner is struck in the chest and abdomen but does not release the M60D's spade grips. The aircraft lifts at 8:04 and crash lands 800 meters east. The gunner dies en route to the 22nd Surgical Hospital at Phu Bai. The ASAO environment pushes the door gunner tactic to its operational limit. PAVN anti-aircraft crews occupy prepared positions with interlocking fields of fire. They employ heavy machine guns capable of destroying helicopters outright. But the fundamental geometry remains unchanged. Door gunners fire during the vulnerable hover phase, their tracers marking targets and drawing fire. The majority of helicopter losses occur during insertion and extraction, when gunners are actively engaging. Over the next 9 days, the 158th flies hundreds of sorties into ASAO. Door gunners suffer disproportionately high casualties compared to pilots. Maintenance records from the 158th show that the overwhelming majority of battle damage on helicopters during Apache snow occurs in the aft cabin and cargo doors. The PAVN learns to prioritize the gunners because the gunners are the only crew members who can return effective fire during insertion. A captured PAVN training document from May 1969 instructs anti-aircraft sections to engage the visible machine gun first. This, the document states, will force the helicopter to break off or become easier to destroy. The 101st does not change its insertion tactics. Gunners continue to fire from open doors at 10 to 15 feet, and they continue to die at rates far exceeding those of pilots. MACV guidance and operational reports from 1969 describe door gunner suppression as critical to mission success during air assault operations. The risk is acknowledged in after-action reports and intelligence summaries, but no mitigation measures follow. Units do not add ballistic shields to door guns. Crews do not adopt alternative suppression methods. The tactic persists because it works, not for the gunner, but for the mission. The cold calculus is implicit. Gunner casualties are factored into operational planning. Hill 937 costs dozens of American lives over 10 days. Helicopter gunners account for a significant fraction. Not accident, but doctrine. On the 7th of May, 1970, the 1st Cavalry Division crosses into Cambodia as part of the Cambodian incursion to destroy North Vietnamese supply caches. UH-1H helicopters from the 227th Assault Helicopter Battalion insert the 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry Regiment near Kampong Cham Province at 11:20 Indochina time. The landing zone is a dry rice paddy 900 meters west of Route 7. PAVN rear area security forces, estimated at 60 soldiers, occupy a rubber plantation 200 meters south. Door gunners on the lead flight fire into the rubber trees as the Hueys flare to 18 feet. The starboard gunner on Chalk 1 fires over 200 rounds in half a minute. His tracers mark the tree line. PAVN riflemen shift their aim from the cockpit to the gunner's position. The Huey takes multiple hits in rapid succession, the vast majority in the cargo bay, one in the tail rotor drive shaft. The gunner is hit in the right thigh and left forearm. The aircraft loses tail rotor authority and spins 180 degrees before the pilot regains control at 200 feet. The gunner keeps firing through the spin, expending his remaining rounds as the Huey limps east toward Firebase Buttons. The aircraft crashes 1.3 kilometers from the LZ. The gunner and crew survive. 5 other helicopters in the same lift take similar battle damage, dozens of hits total. The overwhelming majority in the cargo bay or doors. Not one pilot is wounded. An Australian Army advisor's report from the 9th of May notes that door gunner fire draws immediate response from enemy positions. The pattern holds across multiple insertions near Snuol. The 227th records significantly higher door gunner casualty rates than pilot casualty rates during the first 2 weeks of the Cambodian operation. Maintenance logs from Firebase Buttons show that helicopters returning from hot LZs average over 6 hits per sortie, with the vast majority of hits concentrated within 1.5 meters of the door gun mounts. The Cambodian theatre introduces new variables: unfamiliar terrain, ad hoc PAVN defensive positions, extended supply lines, but the core mechanism remains constant. Door gunners fire visible tracers during the most vulnerable phase of flight. Enemy shooters respond by targeting the gunners. The aircraft survives because the gunner absorbs fire that would otherwise destroy critical systems or kill pilots. MACV operational reports and 1st Cavalry after-action summaries document the pattern without altering tactics. Units continue door gunner suppression despite full awareness of the casualty disparity. Commanders justify the approach on operational grounds. Without suppressive fire during insertion, infantry casualties would increase and mission success rates would collapse. The gunner's risk is weighed against the alternative and judged acceptable. The pattern persists across all units operating in Cambodia. Gunners draw fire and gunners die. MACV does not issue new tactical guidance. Crews continue the same suppression tactics, knowing the outcome. Cambodia proves that the gunner's gamble scales across terrain, enemy doctrine, and theatre. Not innovation, but repetition. On the 8th of February, 1971, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam launches Lam Sơn 799, a cross-border operation into Laos to cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail. U.S. helicopters provide lift and fire support under restrictions that prohibit American ground troops from entering Laos. The 101st Airborne Division's 158th and 159th Aviation Battalions fly PAVN units into landing zones along Route 9. PAVN anti-aircraft defenses in the Laotian Panhandle include 37mm and 57mm radar-guided guns, 12.7mm DSHK machine guns, and shoulder-fired SA-7 Grail missiles. On the 9th of February, at 13:45 Indochina time, UH-1H helicopters insert PAVN Rangers into landing zone 31, 6 kilometers west of the border. Door gunners fire into the surrounding hills as the aircraft hover at 10 feet. The port gunner on Huey 66-116-730 fires over 150 rounds in under half a minute. PAVN gunners respond with 12.7mm fire from 3 positions. The gunner is hit in the neck and dies before the aircraft clears the LZM at 13:48. His tracers, however, suppress 2 of the 3 PAVN positions long enough for 4 other helicopters to land and extract. Lam Sơn 719 represents the most intense helicopter combat of the war. Between the 9th and 25th of February, U.S. helicopters fly over 1,000 sorties into Laos. Losses are catastrophic. Over 100 helicopters are destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Door gunner casualties vastly exceed pilot casualties in raw numbers. The ratio holds. Gunners die at significantly higher rates than pilots. The Laotian environment amplifies every hazard. PAVN forces deploy radar-guided anti-aircraft artillery, sophisticated fire control systems, and man-portable surface-to-air missiles. Yet the fundamental vulnerability remains the 20 to 60-second window during insertion and extraction. Door gunners fire during this window. Enemy gunners target them during this window. The majority of helicopters are hit during this window. Maintenance reports from Fire Support Base Delta show that battle damage on returning helicopters clusters overwhelmingly around the door gun positions. A post-operation analysis by the 1st Aviation Brigade concludes that door gunner suppression remains critical to insertion success, despite extraordinarily high casualties. The analysis recommends no tactical changes. PAVN after-action reports, captured in March 1971, describe door gunners as priority targets and instruct anti-aircraft crews to engage the machine gun first. Without the gunner, the reports state, the helicopter loses its defensive capability. The PAVN explicitly designs its tactics around eliminating the gunner first. American commanders know this and accept it. Lam Sơn 719 ends on the 25th of March 1971 with over 250 U.S. helicopters lost or damaged and well over 1,000 American helicopter crew members killed or wounded. Door gunners account for a disproportionate share of those casualties, despite representing only a quarter of air crews. The final proof is statistical. The gunner's role is to absorb fire, and the gunner absorbs it. The operation validates what every helicopter crew member already knows. The armor protects the pilots to a degree, Speed buys distance when possible, but during the critical seconds of insertion and extraction, the gunner's body, leaning into the M60D, traces marking his position, enemy fire converging on the open door, buys survival for everyone else. Not theory, but fact. From Ia Drang to Laos, the pattern never changes. The Huey hovers, the gunner fires, the tracers glow, and the enemy shoots back at the gunner. Armor protects the pilots. Speed buys distance, but the gunner's body buys time. Rotor wash slaps the visor, the M60D hammers, and for 20 to 60 seconds the crew lives or dies based on where the enemy aims. The enemy aims at the light. By 1972, the door gunner tactic is not a field expedient. It is formalized doctrine embedded in every helicopter company's standing operating procedures. Air assault SOPs specify continuous door gunner suppression during approach, flare, and hover phases to suppress ground fire and fix enemy attention. The guidance does not quantify the cost in lives, but operational reports and unit histories document it exhaustively. Between 1965 and 1973, the U.S. Army operates approximately 12,000 helicopter sorties per month in Southeast Asia, averaging well over 100,000 sorties per year. MACV records show that thousands of helicopters are destroyed or damaged beyond repair during the war. A substantial fraction are hit during insertion or extraction, the 20 to 60-second window when door gunners fire and enemy gunners respond. Casualty statistics reveal the mechanism's human price. Between 1965 and 1973, over 2,000 door gunners are killed in action, representing nearly a quarter of all helicopter crew fatalities. Pilots account for nearly 2,000 deaths. Crew chiefs, over 1,600. Gunners die at the highest rate per flight hour among all helicopter crew positions. The disparity is intentional. Door gunners sit in open doorways with no ballistic protection below the chest. Their legs, arms, and heads remain exposed to interlocking fields of fire from AK-47s, RPDs, 12.7mm DSHKs, and 14.5mm KPVs. A single 7.62 by 39mm round can shatter a femur. A 12.7mm round severs limbs. The M60D gunner's posture, leaning outboard, feet on the skid, firing at 550 rounds per minute, maximizes his silhouette. The tracer mix, 1 in 4 or 5 rounds, makes him a beacon. PAVN Viet Cong doctrine explicitly targets this beacon. Captured training manuals from 1969, 1970, and 1971 repeat the same guidance. Prioritize the machine gunner. American intelligence officers read these documents, translate them, and file them. No tactical changes follow. The reason is operational necessity. The Huey's mission, inserting troops into contested landing zones, requires suppressive fire during the most vulnerable phase of flight. Pilots cannot fire. They fly the aircraft. Crew chiefs split attention between passengers and the rear arc. Only the door gunner can focus entirely on suppressing the tree line during the flare and hover. His fire forces enemy soldiers to duck, shift position, or return fire inaccurately. Those seconds, 10, 20, 30 seconds, allow troops to dismount or wounded to board. The gunner's sacrifice is not symbolic, it is mechanical. Remove the gunner, and insertion success rates collapse. Operations research modeling from the 1st Aviation Brigade in 1970 predicts significant degradation in hot LZ insertion success without door gunner suppression. Casualties among dismounting infantry would increase substantially. Time on target would lengthen by critical seconds, enough for PAVN mortar crews to adjust fire. The analysis concludes that door gunners are mission critical and that their casualties, while regrettable, are operationally necessary. The Army accepts the trade. So do the gunners. Interviews with surviving crew members reveal a consistent pattern. They understood the risk and flew anyway. One door gunner from the 68th Assault Helicopter Company describes the calculus to stars and stripes in 1971. The logic is cold and universal. By 1972, every door gunner in Vietnam knows the statistics. They know they are the most likely crew member to die. They know their tracers mark them for death, and they keep firing. The tactic persists because it works, not for the gunner, but for the mission. Between 1965 and 1973, U.S. and Allied forces conduct tens of millions of helicopter combat sorties. A substantial fraction involve insertions or extractions in contested zones. The door gunner suppression tactic enables the majority of those missions to succeed without catastrophic loss. The price? Thousands of dead gunners, thousands more wounded. The alternative? Mission failure, higher infantry casualties, and collapsed air mobility. Commanders choose the gunner, not because they are callous, but because the arithmetic offers no better option. Armor cannot stop 12.7mm rounds at 200 meters. Speed cannot prevent fire during the 20-second hover. Evasive maneuvers do not work when the aircraft is stationary at 15 feet. Only the gunner's fire and the enemy's instinct to shoot the most visible threat protects the crew during those critical seconds. The tactic becomes legacy. After 1973, the U.S. Army redesigns helicopter crew positions. The UH-60 Black Hawk, introduced in 1979, features armored crew seats, side-mounted miniguns with remote triggers, and ballistic nylon fuel cells. But the fundamental geometry remains. During insertion and extraction, someone must suppress the enemy, and that someone sits in the open door. The gunner's gamble does not end with Vietnam. It migrates to Grenada, Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia. In Mogadishu, on the 3rd of October, 1993, Staff Sergeant Daniel Bush mans the minigun on Super 6-1 during the Battle of Mogadishu. He fires until Somali militia shoot him through the open cabin. The pattern holds across 50 years and 6 wars. In 2024, the Huey is mostly retired from U.S. frontline service, replaced by the Black Hawk and the Chinook. But the door gunner tactic survives. Marine Corps UH-1Y Venoms still carry Marines into contested zones, with crew chiefs manning M240 and GAU-21 machine guns in open doors. The geometry has not changed. The gunner leans out, fires visible tracers, and draws fire away from the pilots and passengers. The risk has not changed. The gunner remains the most exposed crew member. What has changed is recognition. In 1987, the U.S. Army Aviation Association established the Crew Chief and Door Gunner of the Year awards. In 2004, the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association dedicated a memorial wall at Fort Rucker, now Fort Novasil, listing every helicopter crew member killed in Southeast Asia. Door gunners occupy nearly a quarter of the names. The memorial does not explain the tactic, it simply records the cost. What has not changed is the fundamental physics of helicopter insertion under fire. Armor can be improved, engines can be upgraded, avionics can be modernized, but when a helicopter slows to land at 15 feet, someone must suppress the enemy, and that someone sits in an open doorway with a machine gun. Modern crew-served weapons are lighter, more reliable, and more lethal than the M60D, but the geometry remains. Visible tracers draw fire. Historians now acknowledge what commanders knew in 1965. The door gunner's role was to absorb fire. The tactic was never secret. It was simply unspoken. Pilots flew because gunners fired because someone had to, and when the tracers climbed from the tree line, they climbed toward the light, the only light that mattered in the 20 seconds between flare and liftoff. The Huey's survivability depended on armor, speed, and pilot skill. But its survival, mission by mission, sortie by sortie, depended on the door gunner's willingness to lean into the fire, not because doctrine required it, but because physics demanded it. The enemy shot at the most visible target. The gunner made himself the most visible target. The crew survived because the gunner drew fire away from the cockpit, the fuel cells, and the hydraulics. Rotor wash on the visor, tracers in the tree line, and the gunner's body in the doorway. That was the mechanism. That was the price. The armor protected the pilots. The speed bought distance. The tactics bought time. But the gunner's body, leaning into the M60D at 15 feet, tracers marking his position, enemy fire converging on the open door, bought survival for everyone else on board. For 8 years, thousands of door gunners made that trade. The gunner's gamble kept the Huey alive.